Universal Histographic Atlas. Beginning of cosmological evolution. The Big Bang and the Epoch of Planck. Before the first second. The creation of the universe. The universe is created from a point of singularity that explodes from instability. Is the Epoch of Planck with its natural units and constant universal. Every religion or mythology has tried to explain this fact in its cosmogony with the question, how did everything originate? And generally the responsible is a being with infinite power, who created it from nothing. It is precisely a similar act that underlies the predominant idea in today's scientific world with the Big Bang theory. However, there are other models that try to explain it, which do not require an initial act of creation like the theory of the stationary universe or that of the oscillatory universe. Before the first second. The epoch of great unification. The force of gravity appears. Is the so-called epoch of great unification, because physics on this scale allows us to speak of a theory of all or unified field, in which the bosons of gauge, which are the carriers of the four forces of nature we know, gravity, electromagnetic force, weak nuclear force and strong nuclear force were not differentiated and remained united. Eventually, at this time as the universe expands and cools further, gravity already emerges as a force independent of the other three, which will still remain united for a few moments. Before the first second. The epoch inflationary. The force nuclear strong appears. Was an epoch in the evolution of the universe where this experienced an exponential, extreme, and immediate expansion, going from being minuscule to having millions of light years in diameter. It is believed that this is triggered by the phase transition that marked the end of the era of great unification or a new particle, the infl atom. Magnetic monopoles were produced and the strong nuclear force was separated from the rest of the forces. This expansion also meant that the elementary particles that arose in the previous era, which were extremely compressed, were now distributed all over this new immense space, but with much less density. Before the first second. The epoch of overheating. The matter is created, the fermions. The immense expansion that occurred during the inflationary era ceases and the potential energy of the inflatable field decomposes into heat and a relativistic plasma of particles producing so-called overheating. The universe will continue to expand until today, but much more slowly. Magnetic monopolies disappear. At this moment, the universe is dominated by radiation and matter is formed, is to say, fermions appear, which are represented mainly by quarks, leptons, and neutrinos. Before the first second. The epoch electroweak. Separation weak nuclear and electromagnetic force. The rupture of the electroweak symmetry takes place separating the only two forces that remained united, the electromagnetism and the weak nuclear one. All the fundamental particles acquire mass via the mechanism of the bosons of Higgs, thus called God particles, with a certain value of mass in the vacuum. In this moment, the neutrinos dismatch and will travel freely through space without interacting practically anything with the matter until our days. The leptons, in particular the electrons, which will be fundamental parts in the formation of future atoms, also remain free. Before the first second. The epoch hadron. Confinement of the quarks. The temperature drops and the quarks are confined thanks to the strong nuclear force, that is, the hadrons are formed. The most stable are the baryons, an association of three quarks to form protons and neutrons, also called nucleons, and other exotic particles that disintegrate quickly. The other hadrons are mesons formed by a quark and an antiquark. The meson pi is the one that will propitiate that the nucleons remain united in the atomic nucleus. The proton would turn out to be the most stable baryon of all, with a half-life of a sextillion of years. From the second 1 to 3. The epoch nucleosynthesis. The atomic nucleus. The temperature has finally decreased so much that the nucleons, protons and neutrons, begin to group together, constituting the future atomic nuclei, in the so-called nucleosynthesis. Thus a whole hot plasma of photons, electrons, and nuclei of low atomic weight, hydrogen and helium, is formed. With the nucleosynthesis begins the so-called radioactive disintegration, by which some of the atomic nuclei will transmute over time into others. At the moment the electrons swarm freely because the temperature of the universe is still too high for them to revolve around the atomic nucleus and form neutral elements. First 300,000 years. The epoch of recombination. The atom. The Dark Age. Now, the density of non-relativistic matter, atomic nuclei or ions of hydrogen and helium, and relativistic radiation, photons, are the same. But these nuclei, with the cooling of the universe, capture electrons forming neutral atoms, producing thus the atomic recombination, and the density diminishes. With this the photons had the free way to travel without interacting practically with anything, and the universe enters in the Dark Age, acquiring the transparency and black bottom so characteristic nowadays. The gravity began to act, constituting the first immense nebulae with these atoms. From 13,700 to 12,000 million years. The epoch, the Rayonization. Type 3 stars and black holes. Starting from immense nebulae of hydrogen and helium gas, the first Type 3 stars are formed. These short-lived stars no longer exist today and were thousands of times more massive than the Sun. The radiation from these stars ionized the atoms in the so-called Rayonization. They were of very low metallicity, they only contained hydrogen and helium, and not heavy elements such as metals and others. But when exploding as supernovae, their center becomes a black hole, whose gravitational force is so powerful that not even light escapes from them, in addition to launching into space heavy elements that would chemically enrich later generations of stars. From 12,000 to 10,000 million years. The epoch of quasars. Stars type 2 and pulsars. Many of the black holes of the previous era have fused or increased their mass, and so quasars appear as the seed of the center of future galaxies. Around these new stars called type 2 begin to form, which are less massive but more metallized because they are born from the ashes of the previous superstars of type 3. Of these new stars there are still some that can be observed, either in globular clusters or in the nucleus of galaxies. When exploding as supernovae, they will become pulsars, neutron stars, or magnet stars. It is a very dense, small, and fast-rotating star. From 10,000 million years ago to the present day. The epoch of galaxies. Stars type I and white dwarfs. Covers a very long period where the universe already presents its present appearance, with a multitude of galaxies in a large cosmic web, of which we see 400,000 million in the observable universe that reaches 93,000 million light-years. The average temperature drops to 3 degrees Kelvin, and quasars were gradually transformed into galaxies, distancing themselves from each other and remaining between the same large intergalactic spaces. One of all is our Milky Way, which like so many others is a grouping of stars generally of type I and at the end of their lives become white dwarfs. There are also planets, nebulae, gas, cosmic dust, and others. From 4,800 million years ago to the present day. The epoch of the Solar System. Formation of the solar nebula. In the interior of our galaxy, the Milky Way, our solar nebula was formed that will give rise to the Solar System from the gravitational collapse of a giant molecular cloud. A flattened disk was generated and in the center the Sun as one more star of so many of the population I, with planetoids, the asteroid belt, the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud, formed by millions of asteroids and comets. The planetoids of nearby orbits joined together and gave rise to the rocky planets of the interior as our Earth, and gaseous giants of the exterior as Jupiter, which in turn have rocky moons that formed around them or were captured. Beginning of biological evolution. From 4,600 to 4,550 million years ago. Formation of the Earth. The accretion. The Earth begins to form when the solar nebula acquires consistency. Small planetesimals gradually come together, which gives it greater size. When increasing its gravitational attraction already begins the accretion of big and small bodies, that with their shocks provoke the fusion of the terrestrial materials, being a species of ball of magma floating in the space. But also the Earth is going to be the crucible where matter and energy produce the miracle of life. Although perhaps if panspermia existed, it already came from outer space, protected within the rocks that contributed to the formation of the planet. From 4,550 to 4,100 million years ago. The Hadean, initial period. Life appears. So called by the Greek god Hades of the underworld, because it is a stage of heat and chaos. Once the Earth and the other planets are formed, they begin to cool down, and by chance our planet will find itself in the habitable zone, which will allow it to have liquid water. It has thousands of volcanoes, which vomit lava and gases such as carbon dioxide and water vapor into a hyperdense atmosphere, with continuous thunderstorms. The first self-replicating molecules of life appear as ribonucleic acid, in what has been called the world of Arn, which will also interact with amino acids, proteins, and other chemical compounds. From 4,100 to 3,800 million years ago. The Hadean, final period. The late intense bombardment. Began with the late intense bombardment, a shower of meteorites from the Kuiper belt. The Earth cools down and the effect of orbital cycles related to the Sun begins to be felt. The proto-oceans appear, which will grow over time along with the proto-cratons, solid pieces of the future Earth's crust, which are created from the lava that is vomited by the countless volcanoes that exist at this time on the planet, and whose flows are joining with each other. Life begins to evolve in a closed way in microspheres and viruses also appear. From 3,800 to 3,000 million years ago. The Archaic, initial period. Appearance of the cratons. From the Greek origin. The late intense bombardment ceases and cratons, future continents, appear as the Earth's crust can already be formed. The temperature was very high, and in addition, the waters of oceans, lakes, and rivers were acidic due to the dissolution of the carbon dioxide expelled by the numerous volcanoes. In spite of everything, the first real cells appear, the prokaryotes or bacteria. Some make photosynthesis thanks to chlorophyll. This is the case of stromatolites, a colony of cyanobacteria which, when they perform the chlorophyll function or photosynthesis, release oxygen as residue, which will accumulate in the air and the ocean, allowing animal life. From 3,000 to 2,500 million years ago. The Aeon Archaic, final period. The first Pangas. The first Pangas begin to form thanks to the growth and union of the great cratons that floated on the terrestrial mantle. The temperature of the planet is still high due to the radioactivity of some elements. The Earth begins a process of progressive stabilization of the crust, although the tectonic movements that provoke great orogenesis do not cease, and where its mountains will suffer strong and fast erosive processes due to the continuous rains. The eruption of a multitude of enormous volcanoes also continues. Bacteria begin to exchange their genetic material prior to sexuality. From 2,500 to 1,000 million years ago. The Aeon Proterozoic, initial period. The Great Oxidation. From the Greek early living being. Life is still unicellular, although already appear by symbiosis eukaryotic cells, with nucleus to protect their deoxyribonucleic acid, ADN. The accumulation of atmospheric oxygen thanks to the chlorophyll function of some organisms begins to form a uniform ozone layer, which will protect them from harmful solar ultraviolet radiation. But at the same time, this oxygen, which is dissolved in water, will cause the great oxidation of iron in the oceans, which will result in the large ferrous strata appearing along the entire Earth's crust. From 1,000 to 542 million years ago. The Aeon Proterozoic, final period, the Great Snowball. Multicellular organisms. There was a change in the terrestrial biota at the end of this eon, as it has been proven that the first multicellular beings already existed, although with a soft body and therefore difficult to fossilize. Strong glaciations took place that turned the Earth into what has been called the Great Snowball, freezing even the tropics, which caused a strong decrease in organisms. However, this meant that when the next eon arrived, the Phanerozoic, from the Greek visible living being, the surviving species were strongly able to adapt to these new conditions. From 542 to 488 million years ago. The period Cambrian. The Cambrian explosion. There is a spectacular increase of species or Cambrian explosion, creating a great variety of multicellular organisms or metazoans, more than 50 edges. Life is limited to the sea and arise among other corals, mollusks, vertebrates, arthropods, such as the famous trilobites and variety of algae. The supercontinent Pan-Oceania is split into Gondwana and other minor ones surrounded by the great ocean Panthalassa. The end of the Cambrian was of the greatest extinctions of the planet, which was noticed for example in the fossils guide trilobites that suffered a hard blow. There was a general cooling, because the sediments of limestones were reduced in the seas of that time. From 416 to 359 million years ago. The period Devonian. There appear the trees and amphibians. The continents of South America and Gondwana collide with the orogenesis of the Appalachian and Caledonian Mountains, all of which have already been heavily eroded. In the seas, some helical mollusks, the ammonites, were the main form of invertebrates, is the apogee of armored fish, and fish emerge with scales. Some species of fish come out of the water and give rise to amphibians, already breathing areola that invaded the mainland. The plants invent the seed and the tree. The end of the Devonian meant the disappearance of a great number of marine and terrestrial species. Surely it was due, as in other periods, to the impact of a great asteroid. From 488 to 443 million years ago. The period Ordovician. The plants colonize the mainland. New marine animal species such as the agnato fish, the first vertebrates with jaws. Also new plants, bryophytes, such as mosses, which together with some fungi manage to colonize land in swampy areas. There were no land animals due to the lack of atmospheric oxygen. The highest sea levels ever observed are reached. At the end of this period there was a great extinction, coinciding with a great glaciation that put an end to a long and stable greenhouse climate. It could also have been caused by the explosion of a nearby supernova that radiated the Earth from gamma rays or a great meteoric impact. From 443 to 416 million years ago. The period Silurian. Animal colonization of the mainland. Some animals colonize the mainland, such as scorpions, spiders, and myriads. Giant scorpions, tubular and rugged corals, armored fish, and cartilaginous fish, the future sharks, appear in the sea. The first vascular plants appear, which already have real roots and leaves, thus being able to expand inland. In some areas oil and gas deposits are formed. At the end of this period a minor process of extinction took place, known as the Lau event, which coincided with the beginning of a disappearance of the most significant groups of species. From 359 to 299 million years ago. The period Carboniferous. Appear the reptiles. Great expansion of spermatophytes or seed-bearing plants, with immense forests, future coal deposits. Bony fish and the first reptiles appear, while amphibians dominate the land. There are winged and giant insects thanks to the high concentration of oxygen after millennia of oxygen emission by plants, which also removed so much carbon dioxide from the air, which diminished the greenhouse effect, causing the end of the Carboniferous by the so-called collapse of the Carboniferous jungle, where vast forests disappear from hot and humid climate to cold and arid, dying many animals with them. From 299 to 251 million years ago. The period Permian. The Great Extinction. The climate is arid and the maximum of oxygen, 35%, was reached, which made combustion easy. Gymnosperms, or naked seed plants such as pines, appear. With regard to animals, small saurian reptiles appear. The end of this period or limit PT was the most catastrophic extinction known, with more than 50% of the species, when a large meteorite fell in the current Antarctic that caused other phenomena that multiplied its severity. Even the everlasting trilobites disappeared. The plants did not suffer so much because their seeds can remain dormant for years and their roots protected underground resp route. From 251 to 201 million years ago. The period Triassic. The first dinosaurs. After the impact of the meteorite and during millennia in the antipodes, lava sprouted in the so-called Siberian traps, and from the ocean floor methane was released. The first dinosaurs, descendants of small lizards that survived extinction, appear on land. The ichthyosaurs in the sea and the pterosaurs in the air. Mammiferoid reptiles, crocodiles, and teleosteal fish, which will be most of today's fish, as well as many of today's modern insect clades, also emerge. The lands united for the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea. In the plant world we find the domain of gymnosperms. The end of this period could also be due to the imparto of an asteroid. From 201 to 145 million years ago. The period Jurassic. Appear the birds. Pangaea is divided into two continents, Gondwana, South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, and Laurasia, Asia, North America, and between them is formed the Tethys Sea, the future Mediterranean Sea, also originate Rocky Mountains. The climate is warm and humid with coral reefs, forests of gymnosperms and ferns with seed. Reptiles are the dominant fauna, from the tiniest to immense animals. There are predators, Carnosaurus, and herbivores, sauropods and ornithischios. There are birds, which have teeth, and placental mammals, which are small in size. The period ends when a meteorite falls in South Africa. From 145 to 65 million years ago. The period Cretaceous. Extinction of dinosaurs. Is the apogee of the dinosaurs. The Alps and the Andes are formed. The Atlantic Ocean appears when Gondwana is divided, a piece of it, the present Indian, derived to the north, while the Antarctic and Australia united, go to the south. Clearly appear flowering plants, angiosperms, hardwood trees and herbs. The temperature rose and this led animals and plants to populate Arctic latitudes. At the end of the Cretaceous or KT limit, an asteroid that produced a great extinction disappearing all dinosaurs except birds, only survived the small mammals in burrows. From 65 to 23 million years ago. The period Paleogene. The evolution of mammals and birds. As dinosaurs disappear, mammals and birds evolve from small species, diversifying and some become megafauna. Fish and plants are already modern in appearance. There was a cooling that froze the poles, which were previously covered with forests. India will eventually join Asia, forming the Himalayan mountain range. At the end of the period there was the so-called Great Stalinal Rupture, an event of extinction of mammals by some meteoric effect, or by the closure of the Turgai Strait, which united Europe and Asia, thus allowing massive migrations of species between the two continents. From 23 to 2.6 million years ago. The period Neogene. Appear the hominids. Mammals and birds continue to evolve, hominids appearing. They connect North and South America and cut the equatorial marine current that existed since the Cretaceous, allowing the cooling of the oceans, and making it possible for the fauna of the two Americas to mix, producing the Great American Biotic Exchange. The plants are similar to the present ones, but the grass becomes ubiquitous with large prairies, pastures and savannas. More large herbivores appeared, and with these, large specialized carnivores. The limit of Neogene to the Pleistocene is not of great importance, as there was no major extinction. Beginning of technological evolution. From here 2,600,000 to 200,000 years ago. The Pleistocene Paleolithic. Appears the Homo gender. Throughout this period the Earth cooled down without being clear about the reasons. Thus began an ice age, with several glaciations, which has lasted until our days, although we are in an interglacial period. With respect to the future humanity, the Paleolithic, ancient stone, also called the Stone Age, is initiated when the genus Homo appears with the Homo habilis, a species of hominid hunter-gatherer who began to roughly carve the stone as a utensil. Then followed the Homo ergaster of greater cranial capacity, which improves the carving of the stone and uses fire to heat and cook food, and which will evolve to become the current human being. From here 200,000 to 10,000 BC. The period Pleistocene Paleolithic, continuation. Appears Homo sapiens. The glaciations continue because it follows the Ice Age. A great extinction of megafauna and of the different species Homo that existed as the neardental one, by the hardness of the climate and because the Homo sapiens appears, that contributes to it. Humanity spread to all continents, except Antarctica, with America being the last of the colonized. Stone carving is perfected and new tools are used. Man builds hunting instruments from wood, bone, and stone, the latter by carving flint, or obsidian, creating more perfect and effective weapons. From the 10,000 to 5000 BC. The period Holocene Mesolithic. Agriculture and cattle ranching. The Holocene, from the Greek all new or Anthropocene man new, is the current geological epoch. Is an interglacial period within the Ice Age that continues to the present. Glaciers melt and the seas rise several tens of meters. The flora and fauna are almost the same as today, but with great extinctions due to human action. We are in the Mesolithic, median stone. Man leaves the caves and lives outdoors, and from hunting and gathering goes on to livestock and agriculture, after domesticating some animals and plants, makes carvings and cave paintings, inventing ceramics and other crafts. From the 5000 to 3000 BC. The period Holocene Neolithic. Nomadism and sedentarism. The Neolithic begins, from the Greek new stone. The global warming that forces the migration of the peoples to the river valleys follows, thus from the Sahara they go to the Egyptian Nile and from the Middle East to the Tigris-Euphrates of Mesopotamia. Sedentarism and urban civilization begins, creating the first irrigation systems, but equestrian and warrior nomadism also emerges. In the Middle East, wheat became the food support, in Asia, rice, and in America, corn. The Age of Metals begins with Copper or Chalcolithic in the Middle East, coinciding with the development of writing. From the 3000 to 2500 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. The first civilizations. This year 3000 is considered the beginning of the Ancient Age when the writing appears already clearly, making possible the registry of events, appearing with it the history. The prehistory began with the first hominids. Metallurgy of copper arrives in Europe from the Near East. In Mesopotamia the city-states and epics flourish as their mythical king Gilgamesh. In Egypt the pharaohs with Menes arise, then with Zoser the pyramids, in China the mythical kings, and in India, the culture of the Indus with older roots. In Africa, agriculture and cattle ranching are expanding. In America, two centers of civilization emerge, one in Mexico and the other in Peru, although they continue to use stone. From the 2500 to 2250 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. The first great constructions. The first great constructions appeared, fortifications, temples, necropolis, and palaces in various parts of the world. Europe comes from the east, the wheel, the animal draft, the plough, and other utensils. Troy reaches its splendor, and in Egypt great pyramids are raised with the pharaoh Sneferu, reaching the summit with the Great Pyramid of Cheops and the Sphinx of Khephren. In Sumer, Mesopotamia, ziggurats will rise in their city-states governed by paitses. In India cities are traced in the civilization of the Indo, like that of Mohenjo-Daro, and fortifications. Even in the distant and isolated America, samples of great collective architecture are already appearing. From the 2250 to 2000 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. The Akkadian Empire. Crete is consolidated as a thalassocracy. The Hittites of Indo-European origin, penetrate by the north, settling in Asia Minor. To the north of Sumer arrive Semitic nomads, who thanks to the use of new arches create the Akkadian Empire with Sargon of Academic, the first great conqueror of history, although in the long run the primitive Sumerians regained their independence. Then he highlighted Gudea de Lagash, Caudillo, religious reformer and art patron. Egypt is divided in two until its reunification with the pharaoh Tebano-Mentuhotep II. The Xia dynasty began in China. In the civilization of the Indus, cities are probably abandoned due to climate change. From the 2000 to 1750 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. Indo-European invasions. The Indo-European linguistic group initiates the so-called Indo-European invasions from the south of Russia, thus Bronze enters Europe, Medes and Persians arrive to the east, and Aryans to India. The other great linguistic group, the Ural-Altaic, in the Altai region, will give rise to Turkish, Finnish and Mongolian. The Hittite Empire is founded. Egypt reaches its maximum extension. In Mesopotamia the Amorites founded the Babylonian Empire, and one of their kings, Hammurabi, extended his power throughout the region, fixing his famous Code of Hammurabi, Law of Talion. It is believed that during this period the patriarch Abraham de Ur came out of Mesopotamia. In America the Paleo-Eskimos expand from Siberia. From the 1750 to 1500 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. The invasion of the Hyksos. In Europe the use of bronze is generalist, the axes of war arriving and becoming the most warlike and complex society. Agriculture, livestock, handicrafts and commerce also progress, using barter or amber as currency. Crete knows its golden age. In Egypt there is the invasion of the Hyksos, coming from the east and make it split in two, the delta for the Hyksos and Tebas to the south, for the Egyptians. In Asia Minor, the Hittite Empire and the Hurritas of Mitanni are extended. The bronze arrives to China and the Shang dynasty begins that propitiates the appearance of the Chinese writing. In Central America, the Olmecs who developed agriculture appeared. From the 1500 to 1250 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. Pharaoh Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti. Mycenae reaches its maximum apogee with Agamemnon. In Egypt Amosis I expels the Hyksos founding the new Egyptian Empire. The pharaoh Hatshepsut increased trade and his stepchild Tutmosis III, attained territorial heyday. Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti established monotheism. In India the Aryans with their cavalry put an end to the civilization of the Indus and founded small kingdoms with hardly any resistance, beginning the Vedic period. China is already the most populated state in the world. In the Pacific the peoples of Southeast Asia continue colonizing their islands. In America there is only sedentarism in the Valley of Mexico and the Andean zone where cultures flourish that raise centers of worship. From the 1250 to 1000 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. Arrival from the Iron. The Age of Iron begins with new movements of Indo-Europeans, who in waves carry chaos. They are called Sea Peoples by the Egyptians who managed to reject them. In Mesopotamia the Elamites take Babylon, until Nabucodonosor I manages to reunify the country. The Phoenicians, a federation of maritime city-states, spread trade throughout the Mediterranean using their alphabet. Grecia is invaded by the Dorians. In India, the Aryan tribes continued to settle on the wide plain of the Ganges. In China, the Zhou dynasty begins, succeeding the Shang. In America, the Olmecs and Chavan civilization appear, already structured in political institutions. From the 1000 to 900 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. The kings David and Solomon. Iron progressively replaces bronze. The so-called Dark Period following the Doria invasion begins in Greece. Egypt experiences a fall and the Hebrews reach their golden age with the King David and Solomon whose fame made it visited from Arabia by the Queen of Saba. The Phoenicians colonized the Mediterranean. In Mesopotamia the Assyrians recover from the Aramaic invasion. In Western Asia here are Scythians, Cimmerians, Alans, Tocharians, and others. In India, the Aryans began to implement a caste system. In China the Zhou dynasty derives to a feudal state reducing the power of the emperor. In America, the Olmec and Chavan cultures take hold. From the 900 to 800 before Christ. The ancient age of history. Nomadism quester. The climate becomes dry and iron replaces copper and stone in utensils. In Europe the Celtic expansion takes place with the culture of the fields of urns. New lands were broken, growing considerably the population. In Africa the Berbers extend by the Mediterranean coast dedicated to the shepherding. Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians. The equestrian nomadism of shepherding is imposed in Asia and Europe. Assyrian expansion takes place, dominating Mesopotamia and the Middle East, making vassals to Phoenicians and Israelites. In China, feudalism makes the emperor's authority more and more nominal. From the 800 to 700 before Christ. The ancient age of history. The foundation of Rome. According to legend, the Romulus and Remus brothers founded Rome. Greek expansion in the Mediterranean, with colonies. Their city-states only unite in alliances and hold Olympic Games as a symbol of peace. The most outstanding literary figure is Homer. The XXV dynasty of Egypt, of Nubian origin, failed to stop the decline in which it found itself. The time of the legendary and greedy Midas king who turned what he touched into gold. Assyria reaches its maximum territorial expansion. Vedic rituals are written in India. China remains under the power of the Zhou dynasty, which moves the capital to Luoyang away from the attacks of the barbarians. In America, the Zapotecs create new forms of writing. From the 700 to 600 before Christ. The ancient age of history. The Assyrian Empire. In Greece arises what will be the Western scientific philosophy, with Thales of Miletus considered its initiator. The Assyrian Empire reached its apogee with the Assurbanipal that invaded Egypt and Elam, destroying Susa in Mesopotamia. He built the great library of Nineveh. The Sumerian nomads go to Anatolia pushed by the Scythians. Assyria collapses at the end of this century. Iron metallurgy arrives in China at the end of the period of springs and autumns. The struggle between the principalities of Xin, Jin, and Zhou continues for the predominance in the country, before the passivity of the emperors Zhou. Olmec influence in Mesoamerica increases. From the 600 to 500 before Christ. The ancient age of history. The fall of the Assyrian Empire. Religious and philosophical movements arise, in Greece Pythagoras, in India Buddha, in Persia Zoroaster, in China Confucius, and in Israel several prophets. Tartessians flourish in Europe. In Greece the Athenian democracy is invented by the Solon reformer. Egypt is conquered by the Persians. In Central Africa the Nok culture emerges. In Lydia, the minted coin is invented. The Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar II takes Jerusalem. But the Babylonians would be overthrown by Ciro II, who founded the Persian Empire. China continues to be convulsed by the struggles between the principalities into which it is divided. In Central America, the city of Monte Alban is a great political and religious center with great constructions. From the 500 to 400 before Christ. The ancient age of history. The age of Greek gold. In Italy the Republican Rome is consolidated. Atena's new under Pericles its Greek golden age, flourishing the democracy, the arts, and the sciences. It creates the League of the Delos, and by means of the medical wars it contains the Persians into Sparta with the War of the Peloponnese. Dario I consolidates and expands the Persian Empire, dominating the steppe Scythian peoples, and founds Persepolis. Buddhism and the Great Kingdom of Magadha appeared in India. In China, the period of the combatant states began, something that the neighboring nomadic peoples took advantage of to carry out incursions. In Central America, the Mayas spread by founding several cities in the Yucatan. From the 400 to 300 before Christ. The ancient age of history. The empire of Alexander the Great. The Etruscan civilization disappears, as the Roman Empire acquires the domain of the Latin League. The splendor of Greek culture continues, especially with the Platon and Aristotle philosophers, fundamental to Western civilization. But the internal wars make Greece decline and Macedonian emerges as a power. Alexander the Great accedes to the Macedonian throne and proposes to unify West and East in an empire. So after cutting the Gordian knot, destroys the Persian Empire and takes Egypt, Syria, and part of India. Founds cities spreading Greek culture. In the East, instability continues in China, with the fighting states, and in Japan the Yomon period ends. From the 300 to 200 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. Division of the Alexandrian Empire. The Punic Wars between Carthage and Rome began for the dominion of the Mediterranean, with Rome emerging as a power. Division of the Alexandrian Empire between its generals, forming opposing kingdoms, with the Ptolemy in Egypt and the Seleucid in Mesopotamia. In the same zone the births arise, and in Bactria a kingdom Greco-Bactriano that syncretizes the Hellenism with the Buddhism. Asoka founded the first Indian Empire in India. In China the Great Wall begins and the king of the Qin state, Qin Shi Huang, took the rest of the states and overthrew the nominal Zhou dynasty, unifying China in an empire. In America the Mayas are consolidated and Nazca appears. From the 200 to 100 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. Destruction of Carthage. Rome defeats Carthage in the Third Punic War and destroys the city. Then invade Asia Minor, but internally conflicts are produced by the social reforms of the brothers Gracchus. Egypt is a prosperous Hellenistic kingdom like the recently created Greco-Bactrian kingdom in Central Asia, although it ends up succumbing to the attack of Sacios and Takarios. In India falls the Maurya Empire, divided into several kingdoms. China is unified by the first emperor Qin Shi Huang, and begins a period of prosperity, adopting Confucianism as a moral basis. In South America, the Mochica culture appears in a narrow desert coastal strip. From the 100 before Christ to year 1 before Christ. The Ancient Age of History. The expansion of the Huns. In Europe the Germans harass the borders of Rome. The Celts are Romanized with the conquest of Gallia by Julius Caesar. He joins the Egyptian Cleopatra, but both die after civil wars that will end with the creation of the Roman Empire by Octave. The births stop the Roman expansion and control the Silk Route. In India the Sacio Empire rises, substituted by the Kusanio of the north. In Asia there are migrations of peoples such as the Huns, who are a nomadic power. In China comes the Han dynasty whose culture extends to neighboring countries. In North America agricultural societies appear, and in Mesoamerica the Maya Tikal city is a cultural center. From the year 1 to 100. The Ancient Age of History. The Pax Roman. Rome borders the entire Mediterranean, calling it Mare Nostrum, achieving its Pax Roman with Latin as the lingua franca. With the arrival of Jesus from Nazareth, Christianity emerged in Palestine, as a reform movement of rigid Judaism. In India, Buddhism is in retreat from Brahmanism, but outside it expands and reaches China, Korea, Japan, and Indochina, where the kingdom of Funan appeared. In China they have returned to power, recovering the Turkestan and reopening the Silk Route by land and then by sea, from the port of Canton to Rome. In North America the culture of Hopewell extends, and in Mesoamerica is built the impressive city Teotihuacan. From the year 100 to 200. The Ancient Age of History. The expansion of Christianity. A population explosion takes place. China reaches 60 million inhabitants, Rome 50 million and India 35 million. Christianity expands thanks to the proselytism of the disciples. Rome in this so-called century of the Antonines is threatened by the north by Vandals, Franks, Saxons and other tribes. The parting empire controls the Silk Route and its income. Dravidian kingdoms appear in southern India. In the Han China, paper is invented, but with the revolt of the Yellow Turbans, its decline begins. In North America the Hopewell culture extends over the Great Plains, and in South America the Nazca and Mochica cultures reach their splendor. From the year 200 to 300. The Ancient Age of History. The New China Division. The barbarians pressure the Roman and Chinese empires. In Europe the Goths found a kingdom in Ukraine. The Franks invade the Gaul but end up being assimilated by Rome. The Visigoths take the Dacian and the Saxons devastate the North Atlantic coasts. In the Roman Empire queen the anarchy, but Diocletian puts order, reinforcing the imperial power. The Persian Sassanid Empire, a Zoroastrian theocracy, replaces the childbirth empire. The period of the three kingdoms Wei, Wu, and Sui begins in China. Wei takes the others and reunifies the empire. Japan begins its historic journey with the Yamato period. In Central America begins the classic Mayan period. From the year 300 to 400. The Ancient Age of History. Migrations of the barbarians. In the face of scarcity, the Germans migrate west and put pressure on the Roman Empire, and the Visigoths invade the Thracian Empire. The Constantine Emperor declares official religion Christianity. The Sassanid Persians conquer the Kusanian Empire, thus reaching India, although the White Huns appear along the northern border. The Gupta Empire was founded in India with Chandragupta I, starting a cultural golden age and a maritime trade with Roma because the Silk Route was impracticable due to the convulsions of the area. He Huns, nomadic peoples, invade China, which is dismembered again in the period known as the 16 Kingdoms, formed by non-Chinese ethnic peoples. From the year 400 to 476. The Ancient Age of History. The fall of the Roman Empire. Attila, king of the Huns, was thrown against Byzantium, then an alliance of Romans and barbarian peoples defeated him in the Battle of the Catalonian Fields. The Emperor Theodosius propitiates the division of the empire, Byzantium in east and Rome in west, but the barbarian invasions of Suevi, Vandals, Alanos, Franks, Godos, and others cause the fall of Roma in 476, being the end of the Ancient Age. Sassanid Persia is invaded by White Huns or Hephthalites. In India the Gupta Empire is invaded by the White Huns and the Tamil Cholas Toman Sealan and raise a maritime empire. In China, the kingdom of Wei imposes itself on others who are Chinifying themselves. From the year 476 to 600. The Middle Ages. The Pre-Romanesque. The Barbarian Kingdoms. From the ancient Roman Empire of the West, the barbarian kingdoms arise, beginning the Middle Ages in the pre-Romanesque style. But the Byzantium resists, and with Justinian it recovered North Africa and Italy. The Sassanid Empire reached a peak of greatness with Khosrow I in India. The invasions of the White Huns put an end to the Gupta Empire. The Chalukya, Pallava, and Kerala empires are born in the south of India. In Asia, the Ko-Turko Empire was divided into Eastern, Mongolian, and Western, Turkestan, Khanates. Northern China reunites with the Sui but divides with the Wei. The south knows a stable period under the Liang dynasty. New kingdoms emerge in Indochina. In Africa the kingdom of Ghana arises. From the year 600 to 700. The Middle Ages. The Islam. In Europe, thanks to the ancient Roman administration, the barbarian kingdoms were consolidated. In Arabia with the Prophet Muhammad arose the Islam that expanded rapidly by conquest. Thus he unified the Arabian tribes that came to create the Arab Empire, a caliphate that takes Syria, Persia, and Egypt. Then the Islamized Umayyads from Damascus will continue the conquests through North Africa and east to India. The Persian Sassanid Empire that is Islamized falls. However, the superior Persian culture made that the direction of the Islam will pass to these. In India the Harsha Empire will occupy the north of the subcontinent. In China the Tang Empire is formed, reaching boom and recovering the Turkestan. From the year 700 to 800. The Middle Ages. The Arab Empire. In Europe the Arabs create Al-Andalus but are stopped in the Battle of Poitiers. Byzantium continues to be weakened by the old iconoclastic conflict and is harassed. The Abbasids will replace the Umayyads at the head of the empire with their capital in Baghdad. In India only a large confederation of Hindu princes stops Islam in Indo. Tibet develops a monarchical theocratic government based on Buddhism. China concentrates its efforts on defending itself against the nomads of the north. In Java a great maritime empire emerges. In Central America, there is anarchy and Teotihuacan is burned and Alban Mountain abandoned. In the Andean zone their cultures are absorbed by the Huari Empire. From the year 800 to 900. The Middle Ages. The Charlemagne Emperor. The way of St. James begins. In Europe feudalism arises when kings lose power. In Charlemagne France he founded the Carolingian Empire that fights against the expansion of Islam, which advances through Italy and Spain. Then the empire would be divided by the Treaty of Verdun. To the north follow the Viking incursions to the British and French islands. The Arab Empire is divided. Southeast Asia sees the birth of the Khmer Empire as the most powerful in the area. The Chinese Tang continues to be threatened by internal conspiracies. Gunpowder is invented. In America the Maya decline begins, while Tiwanaku is center of attraction in the Andean zone. To the north, a culture emerges on the banks of the Mississippi. From the year 900 to 1000. The Middle Ages. Viking expansion, the Normans. Century marked by millenarianism, fear of the end of the millennium. Romanesque begins. While Byzantium loses territory, the sacred Germanic Roman Empire emerges. Global warming propitiates the Viking, or Norman, expansion that will devastate the European coasts, arriving to Greenland and America with the trips of Eric the Red. Is the century of Muslim cultural gold, especially in Al-Andalus under the Caliphate of Córdoba. In China fall the Tang there is anarchy and was divided into kingdoms. In Korea the kingdom of Goryeo imposes itself on its rivals. In America there is Toltec civilization in the south. In Black Africa, the kingdom of Nubia reaches its maximum splendor and the Bantus continue their expansion to the south. From year 1000 to 1050. The Middle Ages. The Chinese Empire. Europe overcomes the millenarianism and begins the economic recovery. God's truce is imposed for war conflicts. The troubadours spread the songs of deeds. The papacy initiates the struggle of investitures, a struggle between the secular power, in hands of kings, and the religious one with the more and more influential popes. The Caliphate of Córdoba is divided into kingdoms of Taifas. In India, the strength of the two empires, the Chola and the Chalukya, which improved their military power in an attempt to gain control of the region, should be highlighted. In China with the Song dynasty there was an economic bonanza and an increase in manufactured food. From the year 1050 to 1100. The Middle Ages. The Seleucid Turks. In Europe, feudalism and nobility are on the rise. Normans conquer England with figures like William I. In Spain the reconquest is accelerated, with Alfonso VI and his vassal the Cid Campeador. The Great Schism of the Orient occurs in 1054, which meant the division of the Church into the Catholic and Orthodox confessions. In North Africa, the Almoravid Empire arose and reached the Ebro. The Seljuk Empire was created in the Middle East, extending from Anatolia to Central Asia. China obliges to pay tribute to the nomads Khitanes of the north, the compass is invented, key piece in the future navigations, and the pagoda is consolidated. From the year 1100 to 1150. The Middle Ages. The Crusades. The Crusades begin, an attempt to recover holy ground. The First Crusade in 1099 takes Jerusalem from the Muslims and the Kingdom of Jerusalem is founded. Military orders such as that of the Knights Templar appear. In the Balkans, Serbs and Bulgarians managed to escape from Byzantium. In Southeast Asia, the imposing Angkor Wat religious center was built in the Khmer Empire. The Mongolian steppes see the Khitan Empire fall. In China, the churches invaded the north and forced the Sung to take refuge in the south. In Central America, there is Toltec domination in the Yucatan and consolidation of the Chimu Empire in South America. From the year 1150 to 1200. The Middle Ages. The Gothic. The Sultanate of Saladin. The Gothic style appears, with an incipient bourgeoisie in the cities, burgess, that looks for the profit and not to cultivate lands. This creates new trades grouped in guilds. The Federal Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and the English King Richard Heart of Lion are part of the Third Crusade, but Saladin gets the Islamic triumph. In India there was the conquest by the Ghurids of Afghanistan that will turn out to be the first Muslim state in India. North of China, Genghis Khan unified the Mongol tribes. Japan knows the first feudal military regime, the shogunate Kamakura. In Africa, the Mali Empire appears. In central Mexico come from the north and the Aztecs. From the year 1200 to 1250. The Middle Ages. The Mongoli Genghis Khan. The Almohads see their empire collapse in Spain and North Africa. The Fourth Crusade was fatal for Byzantium, as the Crusaders assault Constantinople. The Mongol Empire is created, led by Genghis Khan, which unifies all the Mongolian tribes, and from the north of China it goes westwards with blood and fire, invading Russia and reaching the east of Europe. This paralyzes the Silk Road by land that passes to be made by sea, controlled by the Arabs who benefit. In India, the sultans of Delhi fortify the Indo, and the Chinese of the south prepare themselves for a very long resistance. In sub-Saharan Africa was born the extensive Mandingo kingdom of Mali, founded by Sundiata. From the year 1250 to 1300. The Middle Ages. The Chinese Emperor Kublai Khan. Europe shows unusual vigor with universities, cathedrals, religious orders, trade with the East, rediscovery of the Greco-Latin culture. The Mamluks, slaves, take power in the Muslim states of Egypt and Delhi. The Mongol Empire disintegrates into Khanates, Islamizing most of them. China is taken by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, where merchant travelers arrive who are well received as Marco Polo and European missionaries. With the end of the Mongol Wars, the Mongolian Pax was extended and the Silk Land route will be reopened. Japan suffers an attempted Mongol invasion aborted by a typhoon. From the year 1300 to 1350. The Middle Ages. The Black Death. The case of feudalism in Europe in more centralized states. The Small Ice Age begins, causing famines and favoring epidemics, such as the Black Death that killed a third of the European population. France and England join the 100-Year War, as a consequence of English possessions in the Gallic country, but England loses in the meantime Scotland. The Kalmar Union groups the three Scandinavian kingdoms. In India, the Sultanate of Delhi takes over the Deccan. China falls into anarchy after the death of Kublai Khan. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec Empire is born with Tenochtitlan of capital, a pole of commercial and cultural attraction. From the year 1350 to 1400. The Middle Ages. The Renaissance. The Great Schisma of the Western. There are great medieval travelers, and their stories helped to get to know distant civilizations. In Italy, the Renaissance was born with the Quattrocento, the cities grew and with them the bourgeoisie. The Great Schism of the West takes place with the transfer of the papal seat to Avignon being named now popes and anti-papas. In Asia, Osman I founds the Ottoman Empire, a new threat to Byzantium. The Timurid Empire is created by Tamerlan that expands through the center of the continent. In India, the Vijayanagar kingdom was born in the south. China recovers with the Ming dynasty, one of the most remarkable in its history. In Africa, the Hausa converted to Islam initiate an expansion by Nigeria, and to the south, it emphasizes the Great Zimbabwe. From the year 1400 to 1453. The Middle Ages. The fall of Constantinople. Great discoveries at world level. Byzantium disappears in 1453 with the fall of Constantinople taken by the Ottomans, considered the end of the Middle Ages. The Schism of the West, which almost divides Christianity again, is ended. End of the War of the 100 Years between Englishmen and Franceses, where the mythical Joan of Arc appears. In Italy, Medici de Florentia is one of the richest families by trade. The printing press is invented by Gutenberg, very important because it allowed the expansion of the knowledge. In China, the Ming dynasty reached its maximum territory and the Forbidden City was built. In America, Machu Picchu is built, the most important Inca headquarters. From the year 1453 AL 1500. The Modern Ages. The discovery from America. The caravel was perfected that allowed long journeys. The Portuguese, under the patronage of the prince enriched the navigator, managed to reach the India bordering Africa to avoid the Turkish blockade of the Mediterranean. In Spain, with the marriage of the Catholic kings, they unite Castile and Aragon. Christopher Columbus traveling westwards achieves the discovery of America in 1492. Italy enters the artistic Renaissance, which it will export to the rest of the continent with figures such as Leonardo da Vinci and Miguel Angel. In the Holy Empire, the Habsburgs took the imperial crown. In India, the Sultanate of Delhi stands out. China ceases explorations and withdraws. The Incas reach their maximum development. From the year 1500 to 1550. The Modern Ages. Era of discoverers and conquerors. Discoveries and conquests take place in America or the New World. It is confirmed that the Earth is round with the voyage of Magellan and Elcano. Spain and Portugal share the world in the Tordesillas Treaty. In Europe, the Emperor Charles V does not achieve religious union, broken with Luther and his Protestant reform. In front of the Ottomans of Solomon avoided the taking of Vienna but lost the Balkans. In America, Hernan Cortés and Francisco Pizarro conquer the Aztec and Inca empires respectively, and the Spanish Empire begins. Millions of natives died from diseases coming from Europe. Persia becomes a great Islamic power with the Safavids. In China, Portugal settles in Macau with permission of the Ming. From the year 1550 to 1600. The Modern Ages. The Mannerism. The Spanish Empire. In Spain, Philip II inherits an immense empire, and after annexing Portugal and its territories, the sun never set. Defeated Turks in the Battle of Lepanto but could not invade the England of Elizabeth I after the disappearance of her invincible army. In Russia, Ivan IV the Terrible subdues the Tatar Khanatos and begins the conquest of Siberia. In Persia, the Safavids confront the pliers of Ottomans and Uzbeks. China suffers famines, floods, pirate incursions and commercial concessions to Portuguese and Dutch. Japan lived a turbulent period of struggles between the great lords, which ended with the establishment of the shogunate. From the year 1600 to 1650. The Modern Ages. The Baroque. The Colonialism. The Baroque artistic style appears. To the Spanish and Portuguese colonies are added the Dutch, French and English. Russia continues the conquest of Siberia with its Cossack cavalry. The 30-Year War breaks out in Europe for continental hegemony between the Habsburgs, Spain, Catholic Germany, against France, Sweden, Denmark and Protestant Germany, which consecrates the European religious division. In the United Kingdom with Cromwell, the Commonwealth arises after the execution of the Charles I. Ottoman Turks continue to face the Habsburgs for the Balkans. The Manchu nomads are launched to conquer China, causing the fall of the Ming. From the year 1650 to 1700. The Modern Ages. Louis XIV the Sun King. The English consolidate the new colonies in North America. France with Louis XIV. The statisme elevated absolutism to its maximum expression and begins its colonial expansion through North America with the Louisiana. Spain creates in South America the semi-independent Jesuit reductions. Portugal, separated from Spain and also turned overseas. Russians conquer Siberia. The Ottoman Empire snatches Iraq from the Safavid Persians. In India the Mughals take over almost all the Hindu and Muslim kingdoms of the Deccan. The English and Dutch obtain commercial concessions on the coast. China embarks on a dramatic expansion at the expense of its nomadic northern neighbors and Tibetans, creating the Chinese Manchu Empire. From the year 1700 to 1750. The Modern Ages. The Rococo. The Century of Lights. The Illustration. In Europe the Century of Lights begins, with the illustration, embodied in the encyclopedia, together with the Rococo artistic style, and a cultural and scientific revolution that allows it to place itself at the head of the world. Great Britain expands its possessions in North America and Holland cedes to it the dominion of the seas. The Holy Empire was broken up as a new Prussian nation. Peter I the Great turned Russia into a power and colonized Alaska. In China, emperors open up to Europe by hiring Jesuit advisors. In Black Africa there is the apogee of the slave trade that is taken to America in slave ships for work on the plantations. From the year 1750 to 1789. The Modern Ages. The Neoclassic. The Industrial Revolution. Neoclassical artistic style appears. France confronted with a kingdom united by maritime domination. Austria with Prussia for hegemony in Germany. Russia wants the Balkans when the Ottomans leave. Thus the 7-Year War breaks out, a real world war as it would extend to the colonies. The victory of the United Kingdom led to its commercial dominance and its industrial revolution. Watt invented the steam engine. People moved to the cities in search of work and the rich invested in factories. The workers were unprotected and the people were exploited. The 13 American colonies became independent from the United Kingdom with the birth of the USA of America. From the year 1789 to 1800. The Contemporary Age. The Revolution French. Scientific and technical progress, rationalism, and philosophical empiricism characterize this era. Versailles Peace enshrines USA independence. In 1789 the French Revolution broke out, marking the beginning of the Contemporary Age. So in France the populace takes the Bastille, with the motto Freedom, Equality and Fraternity, also proclaim the rights of man, being guillotined Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette along with thousands of nobles in a real massacre, that culminated with the time of terror of Robespierre, being he also executed. Finally with the consulate came the young General Napoleon. From the year 1800 to 1815. The Contemporary Age. The Napoleonic Empire. In France he comes to power first as consul and then as Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, willing to take over Europe and the colonies of their countries in the world. After conquering much of the European continent, he created a continental blockade of Britain, trying to evict it as a world power. After the resounding failure of Napoleon in Russia, an Austrian-Russian-Prussian coalition defeated him definitively in the Battle of Waterloo. Being confined to the island of St. Helena, the Indian is constituted in the jewel of the crown of the British. USA doubled its extension by buying Louisiana and then unsuccessfully attempted the conquest of Canada but were rejected by the British. From the year 1815 to 1830. The Contemporary Age. The Romanticism. The Congress from Vienna. With the fall of Napoleon, the Viennese Congress is convoked, which proceeded with the European restoration of the old order. In Paris, the Holy Alliance to preserve Christian values is signed. Russia confirms its conquests. Sweden incorporates Norway. Italy, like Germany, is a mosaic of states, under the preeminence of Austria being called Germanic Confederation. In the Balkans, the sick man of Europe, Ottoman Empire, loses Serbia and Greece. The majority of Spanish colonies become independent after the campaigns of Bolivar, Sucre, and San Martin. In South Africa, the British extend from the Cape, and the Boers march into the interior. China, isolated, begins to suffer Western commercial pressure. From the year 1830 to 1848. The Contemporary Age. The Victorian Era. Greece becomes independent from the Turks. The Balkans try the same thing, but the Austrian and Russian pretension to occupy the area moved Great Britain and France to support the Ottoman Empire with the famous Question of the East. In the United Kingdom, the reign of victory begins. Victorian Era. Autonomy is granted to Canada and almost all of India is colonized. Manchu China begins its decline after the Opium War. In Africa the Europeans enter towards the interior of the continent. USA annexes Texas, California, and New Mexico. Hispano-American republics do not come out of the political-economic crisis after their independence from Spain. The telegraph and the railroad appear. From the year 1848 to 1871. The Contemporary Age. The Naturalism. The Spring of the Peoples. The nationalisms and revolutions of 1948 are emerging in Europe, which will lead to the unification of Italy and Germany. France sought colonial expansion as compensation for its defeat against Germany. In the United Kingdom, the Great Universal Exhibition is held in the Glass Palace as a demonstration of its industrial power. In the USA the Southern slave states create the Confederate States of America, and the reaction was the War of Secession that succeeds in reuniting the country. Then following the Monroe Doctrine, America for Americans began an imperialist period. Japan is forced to open up to foreign trade in the face of the threat of bombing. From the year 1871 to 1884. The Contemporary Age. The Two Reich German. The Franco-Prussian War won by the Germans to Napoleon III led the Prime Minister of Prussia Bismarck to become Chancellor of a unified Germany or Two Reich. USA is rebuilt after the Secession War, being at the forefront of the continent. In Africa, European colonial pressure gives rise to armed indigenous rejection movements such as the Mahdi of Sudan. Japan came out of its secular lethargy in the face of Western pressures with its Meiji Revolution that restored imperial authority, being the end of feudal shogunate, and industrializing. Chinese, however, does not follow this path. The use of electric light is extended thanks to the incandescent lamp invented by Edison. From the year 1884 to 1900. The Contemporary Age. The Deal from Africa. In the midst of colonialism, Africa is divided between Great Britain, Belgium, France, Germany, and Portugal like a cake. In Asia, Russia takes over the Khanates of Turkestan. China loses several coastal cities. India is subdued by Great Britain. Only the wild Afghanistan is saved from conquest. The emergence of the USA as a power begins after the Hispanic-American War, where it obtains Cuba, rich port, and Philippines, being the end of the Spanish Empire. In the Balkans, with Russian help, Bulgaria becomes independent from Turkey, followed by Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. In Europe, women claim equality, it is suffragism. The cinematograph appears. From the year 1900 to 1914. The Contemporary Age. The Modernism. The Belle Époque. So it was called because of the relaxation of morals and customs, with artistic and philosophical movements known as modernism. There were great technological advances, such as the automobile. In Europe, armed peace continues, which will lead to World War I because of the continuous tensions between states, because of nationalism and imperialism of the powers. USA increases its political power, but also criminality by the strong economic depression. The German Empire or Two Reich threatens other powers like Great Britain and France that sign the Entente Cordiale. In 1912 the sinking of the Titanic takes place, one more transatlantic symbol of the progress of the time. From the year 1914 to 1918. The Contemporary Age. World War. The Great War. 9 million souls dead by the new weapons, the chemical war and the pandemic of the Spanish gripe of 1918. On the Western Front, the Allies hold back the Germans in the direction of Paris in a trench war. On the Eastern Front, the Russians resist the Austro-Hungarians until Russia falls in 1917 due to the Russian Revolution of the Bolshevik Communists of Lenin, which founds the URSS and abandons the war. USA troops join the allies of the Triple Entente and force an armistice on the Germans, who will pay heavy war indemnities. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire were dissolved. The Society of Nations was created in the hope of preventing another war. From the year 1918 to 1930. The Contemporary Age. The Crazy Twenties. In Europe ruined after the war, the Treaty of Versailles creates new countries: Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq. In the URSS comes Stalin, which accelerates industrialization and collectivization. Many countries create communist parties that enter into conflict. In Italy, Mussolini implements a nationalist dictatorship or fascism. In Turkey, Ataturk rejected the Greek invasion, abolished the Sultanate and westernized the country. These happy 20 are due to the technological advance: radio, car, airplane, telephone, cinema, etc. But everything ends with the crack of 29, which sinks the New York Stock Exchange with global effects, bankruptcies, inflation, unemployment, and poverty. From the year 1930 to 1940. The Contemporary Age. The Functionalism. The Great Depression. And in the USA, Roosevelt recovers the economy after the Great Depression. In Germany comes to Hitler power with the support of the population dissatisfied by the massive inflation. He proclaimed himself Führer and created a totalitarian state that developed the economy and industry, but started the Jewish persecution in the Night of Broken Glass. In Italy, Mussolini signed the Lateran Pact with the papacy, creating the Vatican State. The Japanese Empire grows and affects the interests of Europe and the US in the Pacific and China. Great Britain creates the Commonwealth. The Soviet Union was the scene of famines, political repression, and the Great Stalinist Purge. In Spain, the Civil War begins. Television is launched in some countries. From the year 1940 to 1945. The Contemporary Age. World War II. World War II was due to the aggressive expansionist policy of Hitler's Nazi Germany, which had also created a program of genocide of Jews and other ethnic groups in the gas chambers of the concentration camps, a task entrusted to the fearsome SS. The entrance of the Soviet Union when invaded and of the USA. When attacking Japan, Pearl Harbor unbalanced the war in favor of the Allies, who after the disembarkation of Normandy defeat the Nazis. In the Pacific, the war with Japan ends with atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. China expels the Japanese and starts a civil war between the Mao Communists and the Chiang Kai-shek nationalists who leave for Taiwan. From the year 1945 to 1950. The Contemporary Age. The post-war. In occupied Germany after the Second World War, the Nuremberg process begins, condemning the Nazi leaders to death. Churchill announces the creation of an Iron Curtain that separates the new powers of the world, USA and Soviet Union. The Society of Nations was replaced by the UNO and then the OTAN is created for the defense of its partners. Europe arrives at the Marshall Plan, a US aid for its reconstruction. The State of Israel is established with a Jewish population that fled the Nazi extermination of Europe. Indian, with the revolution of nonviolence of Gandhi, becomes independent. Communist coups d'état take place in many Eastern European countries according to the Soviet model. From the year 1950 to 1960. The Contemporary Age. Beginning of the Cold War. The rivalry between USA and Soviet Union provoked the Cold War, the arms race and the atomic escalation. The Cold War intensified with the Korean War and the subsequent division of the country into two. Germany and Japan experienced a rapid recovery despite their destruction after the Second World War. USA lived a cultural revolution driven by rapid industrial development and the consequent phenomenon of consumerism. In Europe, the first steps are taken with the EFTA for the future European Union. The space race begins on the part of the Soviet Union with the putting in orbit of the Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. In China, Mao continues with its communist base regime. From the year 1960 to 1970. The Contemporary Age. The arrival of the man to the moon. The height of the Cold War with the missile crisis in Cuba, the Vietnam War and the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in the spring of Prague. Anti-system revolts take place, such as the one in May 1968 in France. In USA, Kennedy is assassinated and astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon in 1969. Decolonization takes place, where Great Britain and France lose almost all of their colonies, which become independent. Social movements increase in Latin America. In the Middle East there is an Arab-Israeli confrontation. China's Mao launches its cultural revolution, transforming its millenary society. The Vatican Council II is celebrated, the opening of the Church to the world. From the year 1970 to 1980. The Contemporary Age. The CHRYSS of the oil. The OPEP raises the price of the barrel, causing the crisis of oil, industry, and society. Europe manages to match the standard of living in the USA. In the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict is aggravated by the Yom Kippur War. In USA, Nixon resigns because of the Watergate scandal. Soviet Union and Communist China distance themselves, weakening communist influence in the world. The Iranian Islamic Revolution takes place, and Muslim fundamentalists take control of Iran under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini, thereby withdrawing this country from Western influence and locking itself into the most radical of Sharia-based states. Several military dictatorships are established in Latin America. From the year 1980 to 1990. The Contemporary Age. The fall of the wall from Berlin. AIDS is a global epidemic. Video games become popular, surpassing cinema and TV. In USA, Reagan lays the foundations of the neoliberal economy for years to come. In the Soviet Union near Kiev, the nuclear catastrophe of Chernobyl takes place, polluting the zone and part of Europe. With the policy of glasnost and perestroika of Gorbachev, there is a rapprochement between both blocs, and in 1989 falls from the Berlin Wall, is the end of the Cold War. Southeast Asia is undergoing great industrial development. In South America, Argentina returns to democracy after the failed War of the Malvinas, but continues in Chile the dictator Pinochet. Famine devastated several African countries. From the year 1990 to 2000. The Contemporary Age. Disintegration of the Soviet Union. The Internet and mobile phones that allow globalization appear. The target Princess of Wales dies in Paris in a traffic accident, and the Dolly sheep is the first mammal to be cloned. There is the disintegration of the Soviet Union, in several states. The largest will be the Russian Federation, led by Yeltsin. The Gulf War begins against the Iraqi Saddam Hussein, who had invaded Kuwait. In the USA, President Clinton is involved in a sex scandal. Germany is reunified. The Chinese People's Republic begins to adopt the free market economy. The European Union is born. The Rwandan genocide takes place in Africa. From the year 2000 to 2005. The Contemporary Age. The attacked Del 11s. President Bush of the USA declares war on international terrorism after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 that toppled the Twin Towers of New York and part of the Pentagon, killing some 3,000 people. Thus begins the war against the Taliban of Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, causing the fall of both regimes. But Al-Qaeda terrorism continues to strike with attacks in several countries such as Spain on 11m. China knows a great boom, becoming the second economic power, and together with India, Russia, and Brazil, make up the emerging countries. In 2004, a great natural tragedy occurred, the Indonesian tsunami, dying 250,000 people. From the year 2005 to 2010. The Contemporary Age. The financial crisis. Al-Qaeda's terrorism continued to strike, with the London bombings. Global alarm over the global pandemic of the flu, which was not very virulent. A serious global economic and financial crisis began in the USA, caused by the so-called subprime mortgages. Also in the USA is the election of the first African-American president, Barack Obama. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, dies, which would cause a great impact worldwide. The European Union saw its biggest enlargement, incorporating 10 countries, mostly from the former socialist bloc. In Latin America, a boom of the left is beginning in several countries. From the year 2010 to 2015. The Contemporary Age. The Arab Spring. The global economic crisis continues. In the European Union, 4 states, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, and Cyprus had to be rescued. The so-called Arab Spring began with revolutions in several Muslim countries, which served to put an end to their dictatorial regimes of several decades. In the Middle East, the emergence of the Islamic State, which bases its strength on the use of international terrorism, represents a convulsion to world peace. There were catastrophes in the world such as the Haitian earthquake and the Japanese tsunami, with thousands of deaths and great economic losses. Pope Benedict XVI resigns and is elected Francisco, the first Latin American pope. Universal Histographic Atlas.